The Chinese X86-based Zhaoxin KX7000 8-core CPU shows Intel Core i3-8100 equivalent multi-core performance but inefficient design. The Zhaoxin KX7000 CPU supports both DDR4 and DDR5 memory, features 8 cores, and is on par with older Intel and AMD budget CPUs. Zhaoxin KX7000 still lacks good multi-core performance but only when compared to much older Intel and AMD CPUs, also consumes higher power. Zhaoxin launched its fastest desktop CPU for mainstream PCs, the Kixian KX7000, back in 2023, which is an 8-core/8-thread chip. The KX7000 is the successor to the KXU6880A, the flagship processor of the KX6000 family, and retains the same core count. The KX7000 features a 3.6 GHz clock speed and support for PCIe 4.0. The KX7000 brings several major and minor improvements in specifications, but looking at its performance, it's kinda lackluster. PC Watch tested the processor against several generations old processors from Intel and AMD, specifically the Intel Core i3-8100 and AMD Ryzen 5 5600G. The test bench included DDR4 memory clocked at 3200 MHz, Windows 11 64-bit OS, and the RX 6404 GB discrete GPU. Keep in mind that the KX7000 also features integrated ZXC1190 GPU, but it isn't any good for gaming yet. Following are the main highlights of the chip: X86 Century Avenue architecture, possibly 7 nanometers, 8 cores, 8 threads, 4 MB L2, 32 MB L3 cache, up to 3.7 GHz DDR5/DDR4 support, 24 key Gen 4 lanes, LGA socket type, similar to LGA 1700, as tested in synthetic programs. The KX7000 is significantly slower in single-threaded performance in CPU-Z, yielding just 335.9 points against 422.2 points of Core i3-8100 and 615.3 points of Ryzen 5 5600G. In multi-threaded, the KX7000 did satisfactorily compared to other programs, resulting in about 2,517.2 points against 1,618.4 points of Core i3-8100, but loses quite easily to the 4,790.5 points by Ryzen 5600G. However, this is just a short-lived victory in only one instance. In Cinebench 23, the processor loses by a 39% margin to the Core i3-8100 and by around a whopping 145% margin to the Ryzen 5600G. In a multi-core test, the processor is equivalent to the Core i3-8100, but keep in mind that the Core i3-8100 is just a quad-core processor while the KX7000 is an octa-core. Compared to the Ryzen 5600G, the performance gap is just too high. Other benchmarks show a similar result where the KX7000 couldn't keep up with even the entry-level Core i3-8100 processor, suggesting that there is a lot of improvement needed for the processor. Meanwhile, its CPU is quite weak enough to be compared against even the i3-8100, let alone the Ryzen 5600G, which is a dedicated APU. It's just enough for powering the display for basic uses. In terms of power consumption, the chip consumed much higher watts, with around 60 watts at idle and around 110 watts at full load. The Core i3-8100 peaked at 64 watts at full load and 23 watts at idle, and this showcases the inefficient architecture design of the Zhaoxin chip. Even after 8 years, Zhaoxin processors didn't improve much. And even though the KX7000 is provided with support for higher memory clocks and an increase in boost clock by 0.6 GHz over the predecessor, the IPC improvements are quite low. It's still good to see that the KX7000 is quite usable in basic applications, but Zhaoxin has a long way to go to compete against Intel and AMD.